The Lonely Rancher. The Montana Territory stretched endlessly beneath a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the earth whole, its rolling grasslands broken only by the occasional butte rising like ancient monuments from the prairie floor. Marcus Mac Coleman rode his black stallion along the fence line that separated his property from the abandoned Whitmore homestead, checking for breaks in the wire that might let his cattle wander onto land that had been empty for nearly 3 years. At 34, Mac was a man shaped by solitude and hard work, his tall frame weathered by wind and sun, until he seemed as much a part of the landscape as the sagebrush and buffalo grass that covered his range. His ranch, the Double C, sprawled across 10,000 acres of prime grazing land in the shadow of the crazy mountains, fed by streams that ran clear and cold even in the driest summers. He had built it all himself after returning from the cavalry, transforming empty wilderness into one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. Mac lived alone by choice, finding peace in the company of his horses and cattle that he had never managed to find among people. The war had changed him in ways he couldn't fully explain to others, leaving him with a preference for the honest simplicity of animals over the complicated motivations of human beings. Once a month, he would ride into the town of Sweetwater for supplies, conducting his business with polite efficiency before returning to the sanctuary of his ranch. The townspeople had long since stopped trying to convince him to attend social gatherings or court the available women in the area. Mac Coleman was a good neighbor who paid his debts and kept his word, but everyone understood that he was a man who valued his privacy above all else. It was on this crisp October morning, with the aspens turning gold in the draws, and the first hint of winter in the air, that Mac's solitary world was about to change forever. As he approached the old Whitmore place, something caught his eye that made him rein in his horse and study the abandoned farmstead more carefully. The Whitmore family had given up on farming 3 years ago after a series of crop failures and a harsh winter that had broken their spirit. They had simply packed up one spring morning and headed back east, leaving behind a collection of weathered buildings that were slowly returning to the prairie. The house sagged under the weight of neglect, its windows dark and empty, but the barn still stood solid against the sky. What had caught Mac's attention was smoke, a thin wisp rising from somewhere near the barn, so faint he might have missed it if the air hadn't been perfectly still. Smoke meant fire, and fire on the prairie was always a danger worth investigating, even if it was probably just tumbleweeds burning in an old fire barrel. Mac guided his horse through the gap where the Whitmore gate had once hung and rode slowly toward the barn. As he drew closer, he could see that the smoke was indeed coming from a small fire built in the shelter of the barn's eastern wall, where someone had clearly been trying to stay warm while remaining hidden from the road. "Hello," Mac called out, his hand resting casually on the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "Anyone there?" The response was immediate and startling, a rustling sound from inside the barn, followed by what sounded like someone moving quickly through loose hay. Mac dismounted and approached the barn door cautiously, unsure whether he was dealing with a harmless drifter or something more dangerous. "I'm not looking for trouble," Mac called out. "Just saw the smoke and wanted to make sure everything was all right." From inside the barn came a voice so soft he almost missed it, young, female, and filled with terror. "Please don't hurt me. Please, I haven't done anything wrong." Mac felt something tighten in his chest at the fear in that voice. He pushed open the barn door slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. The barn was mostly empty, its stalls long since cleaned out, but there was fresh hay scattered across the floor in one corner, as if someone had been sleeping there. "Where are you?" Mac asked gently. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." The rustling sound came again, and Mac realized it was coming from a large pile of hay near the back wall. As he watched, the hay began to move, and slowly, a small face emerged from the golden stalks, a girl who couldn't have been more than 13, her dark hair tangled with bits of straw, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that spoke of long experience with cruelty. "It's all right," Mac said, keeping his voice soft and staying where he was so as not to frighten her further. "I'm Mac Coleman. I own the ranch next door. What's your name?" The girl studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he could be trusted. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Lucy. Lucy Whitmore." Mac felt surprise wash over him. "Whitmore? But your family left years ago." "My parents left," Lucy corrected, emerging fully from the hay pile. "I stayed behind." As Lucy stood up, Mac could see that she was in terrible condition. Her dress was little more than rags, patched and repatched until it barely held together. She was painfully thin, her cheekbones sharp in her gaunt face, and she moved with the careful, measured steps of someone who had learned to make no unnecessary sounds. "Lucy, you've been living here alone for 3 years?" Mac asked, hardly able to believe what he was seeing. "Not alone," Lucy said, then quickly looked down at her feet as if she had said something she shouldn't have. "Who else is here?" Lucy was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with whether to answer. Finally, she looked up at Mac with eyes that held a wisdom far beyond her years. My mother, she
never left. She's been taking care of me.
Mac looked around the empty barn, seeing no sign of another person. Where is your mother now? She had to go into town for supplies. She doesn't like to leave me alone, but sometimes she has to. Lucy's voice carried the careful cadence of a well-rehearsed lie. Something about the situation wasn't adding up. Mac had been to Sweetwater dozens of times over the past 3 years, and he had never seen anyone from the Whitmore family. The storekeepers would certainly have mentioned it if one of them had been coming in regularly for supplies. Lucy, Mac said carefully, when did you last see your mother? The girl's composure cracked slightly, and Mac saw tears begin to gather in her eyes. She's been sick lately. She sleeps a lot, and sometimes she doesn't wake up for days at a time. A cold suspicion was beginning to form in Mac's mind. Lucy, can you show me where your mother is? Lucy shook her head violently. She doesn't like strangers. She says people are dangerous, that they'll hurt us if they find us. That's why we have to stay hidden, why I have to stay buried in the hay when anyone comes around. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and Mac felt a mixture of horror and pity wash over him. Lucy, I think your mother is dead. I think she's been dead for a long time, and you've been living here alone, pretending she's still alive. No, Lucy cried, backing away from him. She's just sleeping. She always wakes up eventually. She told me to stay hidden, to never let anyone find me, because they would take me away from her. Mac could see that Lucy was on the verge of panic, and he knew he had to handle the situation carefully. The girl had clearly been living in a state of delusion, unable to accept her mother's death, and clinging to the fantasy that she was still being cared for. It's all right, Mac said gently. I'm not going to take you away from anything. But I think you need help, Lucy. You need food and warm clothes, and someone to take care of you properly. Mama takes care of me, Lucy insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. When did you last eat? Mac asked. Lucy was quiet for a moment, clearly trying to remember. Yesterday, I think. I found some berries by the creek. Mac felt his heart break at the image of this child surviving on whatever she could forage, slowly starving while maintaining the fiction that her mother was still alive to care for her. Lucy, I want you to come with me to my ranch, just for today, just to get a proper meal and some warm clothes. You can come back here if you want to. Lucy shook her head again, but Mac could see the hunger in her eyes, the desperate longing for the care and comfort she had been denying herself. Your mother would want you to be safe and fed, Mac said gently. She wouldn't want you to starve waiting for her to wake up. This seemed to reach Lucy in a way his other arguments hadn't. She looked around the empty barn, then back at Mac, and for the first time he saw doubt creep into her expression. She has been sleeping for a very long time, Lucy admitted quietly. Yes, she has, and I think it's time for you to let someone else take care of you for a while. It took another hour of gentle persuasion before Lucy finally agreed to come with Mac to his ranch. She insisted on gathering a few belongings, a worn doll that had clearly been loved to pieces, a small wooden box that rattled with unknown contents, and a tattered quilt that might once have been beautiful. As they prepared to leave, Mac made a mental note to return later and search the property for Lucy's mother's remains. The girl deserved to know the truth, and her mother deserved a proper burial, but both of those things could wait until Lucy was safe and cared for. The ride to Mac's ranch took an hour, with Lucy riding behind him on his horse, her thin arms wrapped around his waist. She was silent for most of the journey, but Mac could feel her gradually relaxing as they moved away from the abandoned homestead. Mac's ranch house was a substantial 2-story structure built of local stone and timber, designed to withstand the harsh Montana winters while providing comfort during the brief but intense summers. It sat in a valley where cottonwoods provided shade, and a stream ran year-round, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings that spoke of a successful operation. It's so big, Lucy whispered as they approached the house. It gets lonely sometimes, Mac admitted. Maybe some company would be good for both of us. Mac helped Lucy down from his horse and led her into the house, noting how she stayed close to his side as if afraid she might get lost in the unfamiliar space. The interior was well built but Spartan, furnished with handmade pieces that prioritized function over decoration. When did you last have a bath? Mac asked as gently as he could. Lucy looked down at herself, seeming to notice her condition for the first time in months. I can't remember. Well, let's fix that first, then we'll get you some food and clean clothes. Mac heated water on his stove and filled the wash basin in the guest room, then left Lucy to clean herself while he rummaged through his belongings for something she could wear. His shirts would be enormous on her, but at least they would be clean and warm. When Lucy emerged from the guest room an hour later, Mac was startled by the transformation.
clean and wearing one of his flannel shirts like a dress. She looked like what she actually was, a 13-year-old girl who should have been worrying about school and friends, not survival in an abandoned barn. "You look much better," Mac said, setting a plate of food in front of her at his kitchen table. "Now eat slowly. Your stomach needs time to get used to regular food again." As Lucy ate, Mac studied her more carefully. Beneath the malnutrition and neglect, she was clearly intelligent, with expressive dark eyes and delicate features that would probably make her quite pretty once she had recovered her health. But there was also a wariness about her, a hypervigilance that spoke of someone who had learned to expect danger from every direction. "Lucy," Mac said carefully, "can you tell me what really happened to your family? The truth this time." Lucy was quiet for a long moment, focusing intently on her food. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft Mac had to lean forward to hear her. "Papa died first. It was the winter after the bad harvest, and he got pneumonia. Mama tried to take care of him, but we didn't have money for a doctor, and he just got sicker and sicker until..." She trailed off, unable to finish. "I'm sorry," Mac said gently. "After Papa died, Mama changed. She stopped talking to the neighbors, stopped going to town. She said people were dangerous, that they would blame us for Papa's death somehow. She started keeping me inside all the time, said the world was too dangerous for children like me." Lucy took another small bite of food before continuing. "When the other families started talking about leaving, Mama said we couldn't go with them. She said they would separate us, put me in an orphanage, or with strangers who wouldn't understand how to take care of me properly." Mac was beginning to understand the tragic progression of events. A woman, already fragile from grief and isolation, had become increasingly paranoid and protective, ultimately choosing to hide rather than seek help. "So when everyone else left, you stayed behind," Mac said. Lucy nodded. "Mama said it was better this way. She said we could take care of each other, that we didn't need anyone else. She taught me how to forage for food, how to stay hidden when people came around, how to be quiet so no one would know we were there." "But your mother got sick," Mac prompted gently. "Last winter, she started coughing all the time, and she got thinner and thinner. She would sleep for longer and longer periods, and when she was awake, she didn't always make sense. Sometimes she would talk to Papa, as if he was still alive, or she would tell me things that didn't match what I remembered." Lucy's voice broke slightly. "One morning in early spring, she just didn't wake up. I tried everything I could think of, shaking her, talking to her, even slapping her face the way she used to wake me up when I had nightmares. But she just lay there, getting colder and colder." Mac felt his throat tighten with emotion. This child had been living with her mother's body for months, alone and terrified, too young to understand death, and too isolated to know who to turn to for help. "What did you do then?" Mac asked. "I buried her, in the back pasture, where she always liked to watch the sunset. I used Papa's old shovel, and it took me 3 days because I was so weak. Then I covered the grave with rocks, so the animals wouldn't..." Lucy couldn't finish the sentence. "That was very brave of you," Mac said, meaning it completely. "Your mother would have been proud. I kept waiting for her to come back," Lucy continued. "I knew she was dead, but part of me thought maybe if I just waited long enough, if I did everything exactly the way she taught me, maybe she would find a way to come back to me." Mac reached across the table and gently took Lucy's hand. "She's not coming back, Lucy, but that doesn't mean you're alone. You don't have to hide anymore." Lucy looked up at him with eyes full of hope and terror in equal measure. "What's going to happen to me now?" "Well," Mac said, choosing his words carefully, "that depends on what you want. You could stay here with me if you'd like. I could use the company, and you could help around the ranch. Or we could find you a family in town, people who might want to adopt a daughter. You would want me to stay." "Lucy, in the past 3 hours, you've brought more life to this house than it's seen in years. If you want to stay, I'd be honored to have you." Lucy was quiet for a long moment, studying Mac's face as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. "Mama always said strangers were dangerous, but you don't feel dangerous." "I'm not dangerous, at least not to you. I want to take care of you, Lucy. I want to make sure you never have to hide in a pile of hay again." Over the following days, Lucy began to adapt to life at Mac's ranch with a resilience that amazed him. She proved to be intelligent and eager to learn, helping with household chores and showing a natural affinity for the animals. Most importantly, she began to trust, slowly and carefully, but genuinely. "I never learned to read properly," Lucy admitted one evening as they sat by the fireplace. "Mama was going to teach me, but after Papa died, she stopped caring about things like that." "Well, we'll fix that," Mac said. "I've got plenty of books, and teaching someone to read sounds like a fine way to spend the winter evenings." As autumn deepened into winter, Mac took care of the practical and legal aspects of Lucy's situation. He rode back to the Whitmore place and found exactly what he had expected: the remains of a woman who had clearly died of illness and malnutrition, carefully buried by a child who had done her best to honor her mother's memory. Mac arranged for a proper funeral, inviting the few neighbors who remembered the Whitmore family to pay their respects. Lucy stood beside him at the graveside, finally able to say say goodbye to the mother who had tried so hard to protect her that she had almost destroyed her in the process. She loved you, Mac told Lucy as they walked away from the cemetery. She made some mistakes, but everything she did came from love. I know, Lucy replied, but I'm glad I don't have to hide anymore. The legal arrangements proved surprisingly simple, with no other family to claim her, and clear evidence that Lucy had been abandoned and was thriving under Mac's care. The territorial court granted him legal guardianship without objection. That little girl has been through more than most adults could handle, Judge Richardson told Mac after the hearing. She's lucky to have found someone willing to give her a real home. As winter settled over the Montana territory, Lucy bloomed under Mac's patient care and guidance. She learned to read with an eagerness that delighted him, devouring every book in his collection and begging for more. She proved to have a quick mind for mathematics and a natural curiosity about the world beyond the ranch. Do you think I could be a teacher someday? Lucy asked one snowy evening as they worked on her lessons. I think you could be anything you set your mind to, Mac replied. Teacher, business owner, maybe even a doctor. The world's changing, and women are getting opportunities they never had before. What about you? Lucy asked. What do you want to be when you grow up? Mac laughed, the first genuine laughter that had echoed through his house in years. I think I want to be a father, and thanks to you, I finally get the chance. Lucy smiled, the radiant expression transforming her entire face. I'd like that too. I'd like to have a father again. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Lucy attended school in Sweetwater, riding to town each morning with Mac when he went to check on business affairs. Her teacher, Miss Sarah Patterson, was impressed by Lucy's intelligence and determination to catch up on the education she had missed. She's remarkable, Miss Patterson told Mac. I've never seen a child so hungry to learn. With the right opportunities, she could go anywhere, do anything. As the months passed, Mac found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. The solitude that had once been his refuge now felt empty when Lucy wasn't there to fill it with conversation and laughter. He began to see his ranch, not just as a place to hide from the world, but as a home to be shared. You know what I realized today, Lucy said one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. What's that? I'm not afraid anymore. For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Mac felt his throat tighten with emotion. That's the way it should be. That's the way it's going to stay. Years later, when Lucy graduated from the Territorial University with a degree in education and returned to Sweetwater to teach at the same school where she had once been a struggling student, Mac was prouder than any father could be. When she married a good man who appreciated her strength and intelligence, Mac walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Thank you, Lucy whispered to him as they reached the altar, for finding me, for saving me, for showing me that the world isn't always dangerous. Thank you, Mac replied, for teaching me that sometimes the best family is the one you choose, not the one you're born with. The old Whitmore place was eventually sold to new homesteaders who built their own dreams on the land where Lucy had once hidden in fear. But the lessons it had taught about the importance of connection, the healing power of love, and the courage it takes to trust again, lived on in the choices Lucy made every day as a teacher, a wife, and eventually a mother. And Mac Coleman, the lonely rancher who had once preferred the company of cattle to people, discovered that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to step out of the shadows and into the light. In saving Lucy, he had saved something in himself as well, the belief that even the most broken people could heal, grow, and find their way home.